Okay, so I'm back with another tutorial. What we're going to do now, or today, is set up a system of pushes based on the wrestler rank that you can set in edit mode. The only thing that this will affect is how frequently they win grapples, and it will not guarantee that they will win a grapple against every lower thing, but it will set it up so, like a ranked S can't lose grapples to anything below a B rank. So, like a C ranked wrestler will never be able to win a grapple against an S ranked wrestler. Um, Although we may work in a sort of a, what do you want to call it? An upset thing on the grapple, so it can happen once in a while. Um, but right now, the code that I have worked out doesn't use it. So it's something that we can add in at some point. Um, Anywho, our real point here is to show you how to use the ModPack's Wrestler Data Tracker feature and the Wrestler Data Manager, which is going to allow you to add new information to each wrestler in a match, which is sort of important if you're trying to do anything more serious. Can this be done without doing that? Absolutely. I chose to do this with the Wrestler Data Tracker and Wrestler Data Manager specifically to show off how to use those. You could set this up in a very similar way, just not using those classes. I just figured it would be a good way to show those off and to get people familiar with them. So, with that out of the way, I think that that's pretty much. Oh, and this will teach you how to write from. It's going to teach you how to create a PWGR always open form that just stays in the PWGR window, and how to save and write information from that to and from that form. So, anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to set up our project like we always do. I'm using the name Real Push. You can call it whatever you want. I figure if you've been following for this long, you have earned the right to name your own stuff. Just be aware that if you use a name different than mine, I'm going to refer to it by my name. So, but we're just doing the same stuff that we always do, renaming the class, adding the references, etc., etc. Let's see, add reference. We go down here to browse. We're going to go up here to managed, grab our assembly C#, grab our mod pack, grab our PWGR, grab our Unity engine, and then we're going to go ahead and hit add. And then we come up here, we add our system.windows.forms, hit OK. Okay, so we're good there. Let's add our usings. Using mod pack and using system.windows.forms and using Unity engine. Alright. Oh, and DG. So there we go. We've got our using set up now. So the first thing that we're going to want to do in this is we've decided to use that Wrestler Data Tracker, Wrestler Data Manager option that comes with the mod pack that other authors can use. So we are going to go ahead and use that. To do that, you need to add a class to your project called Wrestler Data Tracker. And this is the class that the mod pack is going to read from when it reads your wrestler data information. So you always need, if you're going to use that, you always need this particular class. and it can only exist once in your project. So if you're gonna stick multiple components that are going to use it, you're going to want to create bools to indicate when they're active, so you don't have to add a bunch of stuff to the wrestlers that you don't need to. But that's for another day, really. So the first thing that we're going to want to do with this wrestler data tracker is we want to assign a wrestler like a numeric push value based on their wrestler rank, like what the E, D, C, B, A, S. So we're going to go ahead and assign them a numeric value based on that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a static integer table in this class that will hold that information, and then we can just reference that. New int, and then you want the brackets, and then the curly braces, and I'm going to decide it goes from E to S, so from least pushed to most pushed. So I'm going to say that E's are 5, D's are 20. Let's see, what would it be? C's are 50, B's are 70, A's are 90, and obviously S's are 100. These values don't actually matter right now, and I've actually worked out a different way to handle them, or to differentiate between the classes. This just allows me to look them up easily, and that's kind of what we're using the wrestler data tracker for. Again, you could do this in a different way, and it would be just as easy. I'm just doing this to show you the wrestler data tracker. So the next thing you do with the wrestler data tracker is every piece of information that the wrestler data tracker is going to track, you have to add it to the wrestler data tracker. So to do that, you're going to create a public static void, and this void is always going to start with the prefix initMatch underscore. And so we can just call it initMatch real push. And this method is always going to accept a player, and it is always going to accept a wrestler data manager. And there we go. So when the mod pack finds this class in your mod, it will run any method with the prefix initMatch underscore when the match is initialized. So you don't have to think about hooking this in or dealing with it at all. You just create the void in your wrestler data tracker class with the initMatch underscore name, and then you can call it anything you want after the underscore. I've called this one real push, and it will go ahead and automatically invoke that method when the match is initializing. So the first thing we're going to want to add is that push score. So we're going to add that to the wrestler data manager for this player object. So WDT is what I called my wrestler data manager, because it was actually originally called wrestler data tracker, and then I realized that I was going to need two separate things to make this work. So I got in the habit of calling them WDT, but you could call it WDM or whatever you want. Data man, it doesn't matter. But I called it WDT, so that's what I'm going to reference it as. And then you do add tracked data. And if you look here, this actually has a description. It says it adds tracked data to the wrestler. And you can see that it accepts a name and an object, and then it's got all of these bracketed arguments over here. We don't need to worry about the bracketed arguments. Those are for update methods. So like if you wanted something to automatically update, you could enter information here and it would run that during the player update. We don't need to do that right now at all. I may come back and show you how to do that with a clever little thing for this that is totally unnecessary, but we could do it anyway. So, yeah, but for now, let's just leave it. We don't really need it. So what we're going to do is call the data that we want tracked, we're going to call it push. And then we're going to set the initial value to be push table, or whatever you called this up here, your integer array. And we're going to go ahead and get int, and then the player object dot wrestler param dot wrestler rank. And by now, I feel like you guys should be able to figure all of this, to open up ILSpy and look around the classes well enough that you should be able to figure out where you want to get stuff. I mean, we've been doing it for multiple tutorials. So I'm not going to do that in this tutorial. I'm not going to poke around in ILSpy a whole lot. I might if I really need to illustrate something or something like that. But generally, I feel like you ought to be comfortable enough to poke around or to ask around if you can't find something. So, yeah, I'm gonna kind of give you the information from here on out. I feel like you should be able to get it on your own if you need to do something, on your own. And with that done, we are okay with our wrestler data class right now. This is just all we need to add for the time being. And then we're going to come back over here to our real push class, where we haven't done anything yet. And we are going to write a method that compares the pushes of two wrestlers. So we want to know which guy has the higher push. So we're going to go public static bool compare push. And this is going to take two players as the argument. So we're going to go PL OBJ and player PL OBJ2. So now what we're going to want to do is set up two wrestler data managers. So wrestler data manager WDT and wrestler data manager WDT2. And these are going to be we're going to get those in a second. So the first one we're going to assign right now, we're going to go if wrestler data manager dot get WDM, and then we're going to type in PLOBJ. So this is going to get the wrestler data manager from the first player object, comma out, which is a keyword that allows you to pass something into a method, and then it will return that thing from the method as the method edits it. So this will be out, and then you need to do WDT. And what this is that this is a bool. So it says if this player object has a wrestler data manager object on it, return that wrestler data manager and then return true that you were able to assign this wrestler data manager. This keeps you from getting null reference errors, like if something goes wrong and it doesn't assign a wrestler data manager to a player or something like that. This will catch that and then not do anything that requires that wrestler data manager, which I find to be very helpful. If you hover over this and you have the XML installed in your managed folder, modpack.xml, it comes with the modpack archive, so you should have it unless you deleted it for some stupid reason. This says we'll get the wrestler data manager and return it and a bool indicating whether it's null or not. So if this returns false, it means that it's null, and it will return true if it's non-null. And you can see down here it returns true if it was able to retrieve a non-null wrestler data manager. And yeah, like I said, this is just to avoid null reference errors, and I find that to be very nice. So once we've got the first wrestler data manager, we're going to try to get the second one. So we're going to do another if wrestler data manager dot get WDM PLOBJ2, comma out WDT2. And now we've got both of them. So here we go. This is if both things have been filled out, if both wrestlers that we're trying to compare have wrestler data managers. We're going to go ahead and do something. So now what we want to do is get the track data of both pushes from the track data. So we're going to go wdt.getTrackedData. And get track data returns a T, which is a type. So we're going to need to know what type of data track that our push is, and we inserted it as an int. So we need to put an int there and then push. So this should be an if statement because we're comparing them. So this says if wtt.getTrackedData as an int, and where the data we're trying to get is pushed, is greater than wdt2.getTrackedData, an int value from the tracked data push, return true. Else, return false. And then we need one more just in case this fails. If for some reason it can't find either wrestler data manager, we're going to have it return false. So basically, if it can't find either wrestler data manager, it will assume that the wrestlers are either of equal status, or essentially that they're of equal status, and so it will return false. That player object is not greater, the push of player object is not greater than the push of player object 2, which is what this compare push compares. Alright, so now that we can compare the wrestlers, what we're going to want to do is hook into the process grapple. But we really only care about the AI because the player push is going to be manual, so we can't modify that. But we can modify the AI grapple. So what we want to do is hook into the AI's process grapple routine, and this I will come down and show you in ILSpy here. Let's go kill this. So when you hook into the AI, it's going to be this player controller underscore AI. This is the entirety of the AI for FirePro, for a wrestler at least. So what you're going to want to do is come down here and look around for methods that might have to do with grappling. This has a process grapple back. We just need the process grapple. And so we're going to go ahead and hook into that. So let's write our public static void. Void. We'll call this calc push. And we are going to need the player controller AI. That way we can get which player controller AI we're dealing with. And then let's write our hook real quick. So hook target class equals player controller underscore AI. Target method equals process grapple. Injection location is going to be 0. Inject direction equals before. Inject flags is going to be pass invoking instance. And the group can be whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call this real push. And there we go. We have our hook for our calculate push. And in our calculate push, we're going to need to get the player object of the AI. So we're going to go player plobj equals ai.plobj. This just saves me from having to type in ai.plobj each time. So that's why I did it, which I appreciate. We're also going to want the target player. So target equals playerman.inst, not main, playerman.inst.get plobj, and we're going to do plobj.target player index. And if you remember, that just gets the player object that is being targeted. And then, of course, you always want to do this if no target return, because you don't want to do anything if they're not targeting anything, and you're going to use that target later in the code, and we are. So you always want to check to make sure that that's not null. And anything that extends from a Unity object, you can just put the exclamation point in front of it, and if it's null, that will trigger and it will return. So that's how you can check to see if any Unity object is null. It's just exclamation point object. Alright, so now that we've done that, we're going to need the wrestler data manager for both the player and the target. So we're going to set up two of those. So wrestler data manager WDT and wrestler data manager WDT2. And we're going to do the exact same thing we did below, but I'm going to do it on one line this time because it's easy. So if wrestler data manager.get WDM, we got plobj, and we're going to assign that one to WDT. And so when you want to put multiple if statements in a single statement, you just do a double ampersand, so double and wrestler data manager dot get WDM, and we got target, and we're going to assign that one to WDT2, and that needs to be out. You need to do the out keyword there. So now this code will only run if both of these things return true, and if both of these things return true, both wrestler data managers will have been set, so we are good to go in here. So what we're going to want to do is compare the push. So now we're going to go if compare push plobj, comma, target, and this will, the reason that we're doing this is because this code will run for every data, every time a wrestler grapples, it will run every time. So what we're going to want to do is we only want it to run once. So we only want it to run for the wrestler who is higher. If there is no higher wrestler, then it doesn't need to run because that means the wrestlers are equal. And the lower wrestler in the grapple, the wrestler with the lesser push, it doesn't run on their, in their update thing because they're lesser. So only the greater wrestler will trigger the adjustment, I guess you could call it. So that's what we're going to do here, and now we're going to figure out how to do the adjustment. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to assign it to static values, and then we'll go back, and when we make the form that I was talking about, then we'll start assigning it to less static values. So we're going to do int roll1, or just roll, equals unityengine.random.range, and we're just going to have it roll between 1 and 100. We're going to do the exact same thing with roll2. Int roll2 equals unityengine.random.range 1 through 100. Alright, so now we've got the two rolls. What we're going to want to do is compare the rolls. So we got if roll is greater than roll2, then we'll have else if roll2 is greater than roll, and then we will have the We don't really need an else, because if the else would be doing nothing. It just, yeah. So we don't need an else there. We just need to check these two things. So if the first roll is greater than the second roll, or if the second roll is greater than the first roll. If the rolls are even, just assume that the wrestlers are even, and do nothing, just like we did if these are even, if the pushes are even. So if the rolls are even, it does the same thing. It just uses the default wait time. All right. So if roll is greater than roll 2, that means that the player object is the more successful wrestler, and we're going to go ahead and penalize the target. So target.penalty time equals, we'll give them a 60 frame penalty time, so that's 1 second real time. And if roll 2 is greater than roll, that means that the target is actually the more successful wrestler, so we're going to go ahead and penalize player object dot penalty time, and we're going to give them a 60 frame penalty time. So there we go. That is how to penalize a player or a wrestler from inputting a grapple, essentially, because this needs to wear down before it will register any key presses. But there's a couple of things here. Even though this triggers in the player controller AI, it doesn't check. So let's say one of these is an actual human that uses the keypad, or a controller, or the keyboard and mouse. We don't want them having their we don't want to try to penalize them, because it's not going to matter and it's a waste. So we're going to add some checks up here that basically say if PLOB, we only need the target actually. If target dot player controller dot where's kind, equals AI. But we want it to say does not equal AI. So there we go. Return. So now it'll only get this far if the target is an AI. Because we don't want it to check if the if the PLOBJ is not an AI, because then it won't work in matches where the player is not where somebody's controlling a wrestler. Jesus, that took me forever to get out. Okay, so if we're going to do the same thing down here, if PLOBJ.PLController.kind equals, this one we do want it to equal. So we're only going to penalize the player object if it's an AI. The target it's already checked up here. It won't even continue if the target is not an AI. And we will only penalize this one if it is an AI. So there we go. Now we've got that all set up, and so that actual human players won't get penalized pointlessly. And now what we're going to want to do is this will run every single frame. And we don't want that. We don't want it checking every single frame. So what we're going to need to do is add a Boolean that says, all right, we've already calculated the push. So let's do this. We're going to have to come back here. We're going to add that Boolean to each wrestler. So we're going to go wdt.add_tracked_data. We're going to say calc push. And we're going to set this initially to true. That way, it will always be true when it will be true the first time the wrestlers grapple. So what we're going to need to do is come down under here, and we're going to go if wdt dot get, I can't type, get tracked data. And we know that this is a Boolean because that's what we assigned it to be. Boolean calc push. And we're going to come down here all the way to the bottom and go ahead and enclose that in that if statement. And so now that calculates the push only once, as long as we do this. wdt.change tracked data calc push. And we're going to change that to false. So now once you have entered this block of code, because the calc push was true, it sets the calc push to false. So we're going to need a way to reset that. And the best way to do that is to come up here and modify this if statement. So what we're going to want to do is go like this. Or no, it's this if statement right here. If player object dot state does not equal statenum grapple. wdt dot change tracked data calc push, comma, false, and then return. So now we've got this going on where we can basically change it back if they're not grappling. And then we're going to go else. So this is if they are grappling. We're going to come down here and we're going to place that in the block. And then we don't even need this return statement. There we go. So now that is how to handle that. So now we'll only check for it once. Hopefully you guys can figure out why that is. If they're not grappling, I don't need to modify anything, so I don't need to calculate the push, so I'm going to go ahead and set the calculate push to false again. Oh, to true, sorry. So that it resets it because they're not in a grapple. And then if they are in a grapple, it's going to go ahead and check to see if it's already calculated the push. If it hasn't, it's going to go ahead and set it so that it has, and then actually do the calculations that need to be done. And there we go. So now that's the meat and bones of how this mechanic works. Now we just need to get into the, I guess, the data of it. And to do that, you're probably going to want to allow users to kind of set up something that they like. You know, they don't. I don't think users are going to want to. They may not like the way that you have it set up by default. And so, you know, you're going to want to allow them to change that. And to do that, we're going to have to add a form. So let's do that now. So we're going to go references, or not reference, add, Jesus. And then we got Windows form right here. We're going to add the Windows form. We're going to call this real push form. We're going to go ahead, and I like to set these to sizable tool windows. It gets rid of the little icon on the corner. I don't like that. You can set them to whatever you want. Do not set them to no border. Don't set them to that if they're going to be in the PWGR window. You need to set them to something. Like I said, I like sizable tool window. You're going to have to go ahead and name it real pushes, or realistic push, I'm going to call it. Okay, so that's going to be our form. So now the first thing that we're going to want to do is add some numeric up-downs and some labels and things to our form. I am going to do this from the one that I had already set up. I apologize. You know, you're going to have to do this by hand. But it's not very hard to do, so I think that you can handle it. So here is what your form is going to look like when it's finished. Keep in mind that I copy and pasted these, so this is 1, this is 2, this is 4, this is 3, this is 6, this is 5. It's kind of a weird, when you copy and paste multiple things, it tends to do it in an awkward order that I don't care for, but since I don't rename these, that's just kind of what I live with. So, and anyway, these are the default values that I decided on. So if you're a wrestler with an E rank, which is basically a jobber, your roll ranges from 0 to 35. If you are a D ranked wrestler, which is essentially a jobber to the stars, you're the only person you're probably going to be beating as a jobber. You're 20 through 50. Essentially, this goes up by 20, and this goes up by about 30. You get 35 here, and then this goes up by, well, it goes up by 22, but it goes up by 30 from whatever is here, up until you get to 100, and then it just, you know, the wrestler A gets 70 through 100, wrestler S is 90 through 100. So, but the idea is that both wrestlers will roll a die, and this will be the minimum and maximum that die could score. So a wrestler with a rank of E will hit somewhere between 0 and 35. A wrestler with a rank of D will hit somewhere between 20 and 50. So there's a small chance that this E-ranked wrestler will win a grapple over the D-ranked wrestler, but not a super high one. Just like there's a small chance that this D-ranked wrestler will win a grapple over the C-ranked wrestler, but not a great one, and the C-ranked wrestler and the D-ranked wrestler will never be able to win a grapple against the E-ranked wrestler or the B-ranked wrestler, because the B-ranked wrestler starts at 60. Because this goes up to 90, the B-ranked wrestler has a very small chance of winning a grapple against an S-ranked wrestler, where they're the same, and so there's going to be no penalty, and so they're just going to do whatever they would have normally done, which could lead to that B-ranked wrestler winning. But it is a very small chance. This guy here, he's got a little better chance. He has, if this guy rolls a 90 and this guy rolls, a 95 because he can, then he's going to win. So, that's kind of where we're at. The S-ranked wrestler can never, ever lose a grapple to C, D, or E. The A-ranked wrestler can never, ever lose a grapple to D and E. The B-ranked wrestler can never lose a grapple to D and E. So yeah, that's kind of how it's set up. So what we're going to want to do now is, so we've got these nice things in the form, but we want to lock them in. We don't want players to be able to change them during a match, because that would get messy. So what we're going to want to do is come back over here to our real push method, and we're going to set up an initialization method of our own. So we're going to go public static void init values, and we don't need anything in there. We're just going to straight set up the values. We are going to start a dictionary, and the dictionary takes two types. So we're going to say int and an array of ints, and we're going to say roll values equals new dictionary int array of ints. You'll see how this works in a second. So I've called that roll values. We're going to go ahead and say roll values dot clear. And then, why are you not clearing? Oh, that's why. Static. There we go. Forgot to make that static. One more thing that we have to do over here. So I forgot to mention the instances of these forms. For all of the forms that sit in the PWGR window, you're going to want an instance. So to do that, you're going to come over here and you're going to type public static real push form, or whatever the class name for your form is, instance, and you're going to set that to null originally. And then you're going to come down here to the public real push form. Basically what this is called is a constructor. You're going to come into the constructor and you're going to say instance equals this. And that's going to set it up so that every time a new real push form is created, it sets the instance to be that real push form. The other thing you're going to want to do is come back into here to where it to your events for the real push form, and you're going to go to form closing, and you're going to say instance equals null. So if for some reason they close the form, it erases the instance. You won't have it just sitting in memory. There we go. So that's all we need to do to continue with this. So we need to check to make sure they haven't closed that form, because some users are idiots and they will close mod forms because they're dumb. I really don't know why they would do that, but they do quite frequently. And then they bother you about it, and they're like, it doesn't work. It's like, no, it doesn't work because you're an asshole and you closed the form. So we're going to go ahead and check the instance. If it equals null, we're going to go ahead and remember the default values. We're going to go ahead and use those. So I have them typed out on another thing. I just pasted them in. They are literally your default values, except that you have a new thing where you have 0 up here. You didn't set a push for 0, but just in case you get a return value of 0, which is the default value for an integer. So if your wrestler data manager if your player has a wrestler data manager, but that wrestler data manager doesn't have a push value stored, it will return 0 because that's the default value. So you want to have that just in case. So you always want to sort of account for the default when you're using the wrestler data manager. And you can actually Google what basically any type that is inside, like a default type, so int, bool, whatever, you could just Google what the default value is. Any class that you create is going to have a default of null. So any reference class is going to have a default value of null. Any default class is going to have its own default value, which you can Google. So, but yeah, so these are just the regular default values. You'll notice I added 1 to every, except for to this one, to the maximum of all of these, because the random number generator excludes this max. So this is actually 40 through 70, even though it says 71. So you're going to want to add 1 to the max values of everything. And then we're going to need an else. And what you're going to do from here is you are going to set it up so that the values... I don't need these. Let's do that. Let's do this and bring it back. So you're going to set it up so that the values equal the numeric up-downs that you created on your form. So to do that, you copy and paste your 0 value from up here. You're going to want 71, because I forgot to do that. And then you're going to add, instead of saying roll values.add and then the push value and then the array of integers, you're going to do roll values.add, the push value, a new array of integers, and then you're going to do the values from the numeric up-downs. And remember, numeric up-down value is in a decimal, so you're going to need to cast these to the integers. So for me, the roll value at 5 is going to be the numeric up down 1 and numeric up down 2 values. And remember to add 1 to the max values of your up downs. You never want to assume that the user will do that, because it's a programming thing, and they're not going to think about, oh, well, the max value is exclusional, so it's not going, if I set it to 90, it will never pick 90, it will only pick from whatever the minimum is to up to 89. So you always want to add the 1 and not assume that the user is going to do it. So what we did here is if you remember, we did in our wrestler data tracker, we have this push table at 5, 20, 50, 70, 90, and 100. So what you're going to want to do is add a value in roll values for each of those push values. So we got 5, 20, 50, 70, 90, and 100 right there. And then you're going to do the appropriate numeric up downs for each one. And that way you have your numeric up down values now passed into the match as soon as we write a hook here. So what we're going to want to do now is write in our hook. We're just going to do this in our init match. So we're going to go hook target class equals match main. Target method equals init match. Target injection location equals, we're just going to do it at the end. I always recommend doing it at the end unless you have a reason to do it before that. Inject direction equals before. Inject flags equals none. And group equals real push. Okay, so now at the beginning of every match, it will clear our roll values just in case something has changed. And then it will, if it can't find the form, it will add the defaults. If it can find the form, it will go ahead and add the numbers from the form. Once again, they're just the values that you have in your numeric up downs. You can read them out and put them in. I already had them typed out in the test project that I made, so I just copied them to save time. So that's what you're going to need to do. And now that we have those values stored in the roll values, we can come down here where we did the generic thing here in these two dice rolls. Well, now we can actually make them more interesting. So what we're going to want to do is go int push equals wdt.getTrackedValue, or tracked data. This is going to be an int, and we are receiving our push value. Not L. And then we're going to want int push2 equals wdt2.getTrackedData. We want an int, and this is going to be push as well. And see, this will retrieve our push values from our data trackers. Then what we're going to want to do is go ahead over here and hit roll value, and we want to send in the push. And then we're taking the minimum, which is going to be in the 0 position, and then we're going to do roll values push, and this is going to be the 1 position. That's going to be the max value. And we've already done the +1 up here when we assigned the value, so we don't need to do it down here. And then we're going to come down here and do the same thing to roll 2. We're going to have roll values push 2, and this is also going to be 0. And these are all bracketed off. That's how you denote the position in a collection. So that's why they're bracketed. So roll values push 2, and then push 2, and then we're going to want 1 for the max. And so now these are actually going to roll within these values to determine who the winner is, instead of just 1 to 100, which is not very helpful in determining which push is better. So now, see, the higher the push, the more of a bonus you get, and then of course it compares those rolls, and assigns the penalty. So there we go. That is going to cover everything that you need to know to get this to work. I'm actually going to hold off because I do believe that we are approaching an hour now. Yeah, 50 minutes. I was going to show you how to save these values between playthroughs. I think I'm going to do that next tutorial. We'll go through saving and loading, how to use the modpack save game selector information to save game specific data, or you can use the modpack data directory to save non-specific data, or you can create your own directory to save your mod's data. That's totally up to you, and I'll show you how to do that. We'll talk about how to do each one. I'm going to use the modpack's save game selector thing so that you can actually have save game specific values for whatever reason. Why not, right? So yeah, we'll talk about that in the next tutorial. We will talk about how to one more thing we absolutely have to talk about in this tutorial is how to display the form, because right now the form will never get displayed. So let's do that real quick. This is actually a fairly easy thing to do. So the patcher reads these attributes called control panel. So what you're going to do is, just like you're writing a hook, except instead of the word hook, you put control panel, and then you assign it a group, and you're going to call it the same thing that you write in the hook, so real push. And then underneath that, you're going to create a method, a public static, and this is going to return a form. So a public static form, and I usually do like an abbreviated version of my form name. So if I called it the real push form, I'll just say WP form. And so now you need to make sure it returns a form every time. The one thing I have noticed about the patcher is that if you return a new form every time, it will crash. So that is one of the reasons I started adding instances. So what you can do is, and you should do this every time you want to do a control panel form. If your form, so real push form dot instance equals null, return a new one. So return new real push form. Else return real push form dot instance. This makes sure a form is returned every time, but will not return new forms every time. And you don't have to return like a weird blank form or anything like that. So this is the nice way to write a control panel method. If you've been writing mods and you're watching these just to see, what I'm going to say, if you're not using instances and returning new forms only if the instance is null, you may want to consider doing that in the future. If the player goes back to the main menu, it triggers the reloading of the forms, which causes all kinds of problems, or back to the title screen somehow, which I did remove, so it's going to be less of a problem these days. But this is still good form, good habit to be in. Who knows what else could trigger this? I think that there's actually a key press that triggers the reloading of forms. And that's like default to the patcher. I don't remember what the key press is. I don't use it, but I'm pretty sure that Mike added it at some point, and it could accidentally happen. So yeah, this is just a foolproof way to make sure that you're not returning new forms and fucking everything up. I highly recommend that you get in the habit of doing that. Anyway, so this is going to display our forms. The only other thing that we need to do is make sure this loads after the mod pack, which is always a good idea for all of your mods. You want it to load after the mod pack. So we're just going to, in the assembly name thing in properties, we are going to go ahead and add z real push. That way it loads for sure after the mod pack. And then you just go up to build and you build it, and it shouldn't have any errors, and there we go. And then of course you cut and paste. Repo, realistic push. Why are you taking your time? Realistic push. push. Here's the bin. Here's the debug. All right, so now you got Z realistic push, or Z real push, or whatever you called it. You paste it in. I already have one in there with that name because I've been playing around with this already. And then you're going to go ahead and load it up. Are you loading? There we go. Just took it a second for whatever reason. Okay, and so this is going to do what it needs to do. Your form should be right on the top because it should be the last thing loaded. Because they're loaded based on where they are at in the DLL, and of course where the DLL is in the load list. So yours should be last, and there it is, real push. And I've got, of course, I've got no values because everything is. I stupidly forgot to erase my save thing. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go back out. I'm going to go into my save thing and erase it and then reload it because that's not going to work at all. So save games, NAWC, real push. Real push. Let's get rid of that. All right, there we go. So now let's reload it. And this should actually work. Yeah, that's what happens when you make changes to something with the. So I originally had it set up where you could define the amount of penalty as well, but then I realized that it didn't matter. That basically any amount of penalty is going to be enough as long as it's higher than like 30, I think. So it didn't make any sense to like allow that to be defined. I'm just going to use 60. And so yeah, that's kind of where we were at. There we go. Now they're working. So let's go stick wrestlers against one another. So I know that this wrestler is an A rank, and I know that this wrestler here is a D rank, or I believe he's a D rank. Let's check. See, now I'm second guessing myself. Load Dutch Lehman. Skill. He's a C rank. So does he have any chance of beating an A rank? He does, just barely. So when we put these two together, the A-ranked wrestler, or the A-ranked wrestler should beat the C-ranked wrestler almost every time. Because the only way that the C-ranked wrestler could win is if he rolled a 70, because that's where the A-ranked wrestler starts. And let's see if I can lower the volume on that substantially. There we go. And as you can see, he is not winning very many grapples. I believe he won one grapple so far, and that could have been due to Ukemi. But yeah, so this is going to be a fair massacre, but this is also why I allowed you to change them. Some people might want a C and an A to be a little bit more competitive. Some people might be cool with them not being competitive. It really just depends on, how you want it to be. But yeah, so now you can see that that C-ranked wrestler is not going to put up a huge amount of fight. Most of his moves are going to be kind of standing stuff when he wins. So yeah, it's just a nice way to sort of make matches slightly more realistic based on push. I know that a lot of modern wrestling has 50-50 wrestling where one guy gets his moves and the next guy gets his moves, and it doesn't even matter whether it's like a you got like Chris Jericho facing off against fucking that asshole with his hands in his pockets who is just a piece of shit, and fucking the piece of shit is still putting up some sort of offense and getting spots in and stuff, and that really shouldn't be happening super often. So anyway, this avoids that. I know that in modern wrestling that's still that you wouldn't want something like this, but in in actual wrestling that is a thing. So and I think that's everything I need to show you tonight. Actually, no. There is one more thing that I want to show. So we added that checkbox to the real push form, this one right here. I am going to show you, several more things that I need to show you. Good thing I thought about it. So all of these things here, if you highlight every one of them, you don't need to highlight the labels, but all of these things, what you're going to want to need to do is come over here and where it says modifiers, you're going to change that to public. They will default to private. You do not want them private because then you can't access them from your code. So if you were trying to access them here and it was like no, that's what you need to do. You need to come back to here. You need to select them all and set them all to be public. So we're going to go ahead and make this quit out if that box isn't checked. So we're going to do if real push form dot instance equals null, or real push form dot instance dot checkbox one dot checked equals false, return. So now it won't modify anything if somebody has closed the form, it won't fucking bother with it. If somebody has unchecked that box, it won't bother with it. So there we go. That is how to do that. And that's going to be it for today. I'm going to come back. I don't know whether I'll do one tomorrow because I'm doing the Ask Me Anything at 3 p.m. tomorrow. So, or 3 p.m. my time, which is Mountain. But I may still do one. It just depends on how bored I get, I guess. So if not, I will be back on Monday to do another tutorial where we will talk about saving and loading from the form. We'll talk about maybe throwing in the upset mechanic, that sort of thing. But until then, I hope that you all have a good one, and maybe I'll see some of you in the Ask Me Anything, which will be here on Twitch, which my Twitch is twitch.tv / Goatzart, GOATZART. And you can show up there and hopefully ask me some questions. The only thing that's off limits is how to set up the mod pack, or asking me about why something isn't working, or bug fixes, or that sort of thing. It's not the place for that. You can do that on the Discord. So, yeah, that's going on tomorrow. Anyway, I will talk to you all later. Have a good one.